Hello everybody and welcome to parksbros, it's Drew here, and today we're going to be going back in time to experience something that's kind of hard to forget, and that's my first reaction to the newest land at California Adventure, with my totally not 16 months late first reaction to Avengers Campus. Before we go into my first reaction and thoughts on this land, I gotta talk about my own history with these parks real quick. I am a SoCal native and have been visiting the Disneyland resort since I was 12 days old, and had been doing that consistently up until 2020, with weekly, bi-weekly, and sometimes even more frequent visits to the parks, so much so that these places really felt like a second home. And that statement goes for especially California Adventure, as I realistically grew up with that park. And to be completely frank, I literally grew up with that park, as California Adventure is practically a different park altogether compared to when it first opened. One of my favorite parts of that park, though, especially as a kid, was Bugs Land. It was a staple of just about every single visit I had to the entire resort, where it was a guarantee that you could either find me on Flick's Flyers, Tuck and Rolls, Heimlich's Choo Choo Train, and especially Ladybug Boogie. So when that area of the park closed, I was incredibly sad. Not only because it was one of the havens in California Adventure for the little ones, but because it was one of the few places, especially when the park was in its early stages, that was filled with nothing but cool nods, a lot of charm, plenty of rides, and some pretty stellar theming that did a phenomenal job of shrinking you down to the size of a bug. By the time the mid to late 2010s came around, though, it was pretty obvious that this was going to be on the checklist at some point to get completely torn out for a different IP. I mean, heck, they were doing that with just about everything else in the park and still are to this day. Now, I can say there has been a lot of improvement in the park through changes like this. The front entrance is a great example. Even though I loved the original entrance and its whimsy as a kid, nowadays it looks a lot cleaner, a lot better, and a heck of a lot less tacky. Cars Land was another perfect example of plussing the park while taking out things that just weren't gonna make it for the long run. Heck, even Little Mermaid being implemented instead of Golden Dreams, while yes, taking away from the California vibes of the park, definitely was an upgrade, even though I don't think the IP necessarily fits there. But the closer and closer we got to the end of the 2010s, it felt like some of these improvements weren't really improving on the park as a whole, like Pixar Pier, and eventually what would be replacing Bugs Land, Avengers Campus. Now, due to everything that happened in 2020, Avengers Campus was delayed a good long while, to the point where I no longer was a pass holder, as I did not end up renewing once the park reopened, because the price point just didn't really make sense anymore. And I say that as someone who was a premium pass holder in 2019. My first look at the new Avengers Campus came when the parks were still officially closed. However, downtown Disney had reopened, so we were able to walk into the parks for free, which I thought was a cool addition to downtown Disney, and we could check out on some of the current construction at the time. To say that I was a bit devastated is an understatement, looking at that red building where all of the amazing scenery and giant fake foliage used to be, but I figured there was still a lot of work to do and I wasn't incorrect in that. So I reserved my thoughts until we finally got to the day that I was able to experience it, which was in the middle of August of 2024, just a little over 3 years after this land had officially opened. So let's take our first steps into Avengers Campus. Upon first walking into the land, the Avengers theme is absolutely blaring. Now, I was really hoping to be able to see Spider-Man flying up high in the sky, but unfortunately the winds were a little bit too much for him on that day. But we did spot him at the very end of his meet and greet time, starting to run back to the backstage. Being honest, this was a fairly good first impression. The trees had definitely grown in since its opening weekend, and the artists that did the graffiti work, as well as just the exterior design of that building on the left-hand side, did a phenomenal job. All of this part of the land actually surprised me in some really good ways, especially with how it looked and felt. One of my complaints was the first major walkway pointing you directly towards one of the major stores, but I can't say that was unexpected. However, another positive, as you start to turn left if you don't want to enter in and spend hundreds of dollars on merchandise, gives you a brilliant view of Guardians of the Galaxy Mission Breakout, as well as towards the main Avenger building, so you could see the Quinjet popping above, but the trees had definitely grown into their own by this point, blocking off most of that view, which I'm not really against. Now, the main reason we were in the land for the day was to experience Spider-Man, which is the only new ride to the land, unless you're including Guardians of the Galaxy, but that's been around for a decade now, at least at the time this video comes out. So we made a left into the Web Slingers entrance, and I got a taste of a lot of cool comic book and movie references. Genuinely, while I was walking through this line, I was very impressed with some of the niche subject matters, as well as little Easter eggs they plopped throughout the queue. Everything up to the pre-show room was genuinely very nice looking and felt like a positive addition to the parks, even though I was pretty upset about exactly where it was, with Tough to Be a Bug being gone. This is when we got to the pre-show room, which, to be honest, is ridiculously cramped, more so than any pre-show room I've experienced, with the exception of maybe Guardians of the Galaxy / Tower of Terror, but even that feels like it has more breathing room than in there. The pre-show was fine. I'm not the biggest fan of the technology that they try and use on these pre-shows, where it's attempting to look like a hologram, but I understand why they do it. They can do a lot more with it as practically a projection, and I really liked a lot of the references, not just to Disney Imagineering all throughout that room, but also other Marvel properties as well. Now, after the pre-show room, you go through more and more hallways of the web center that you're currently in, and to be honest, this is where I started to lose a little bit of hope and faith with this ride. Don't get me wrong, I think it shows the facilities really well. Genuinely, the design looks exactly like these facilities would, but at the same time, it got pretty stale. It also didn't help. We ended up getting stuck in one of those hallways for 30 minutes while there was a pretty lengthy downtime. I genuinely don't want to hear any of the score from the newer Spider-Man movies just because of this ride alone. I don't know what it is about this whole land, but they are blaring the music constantly, not just for Spider-Man, but also the Avengers and all the other properties that they have in those areas. It just gets so annoying, though, with how loud it seemed to be when I was there. I did like a lot of those spider bots roaming around. I thought those were really cool implementations, showing them running through the vents and kind of taking over the building. And eventually, we were on our way to one of the ride vehicles. Now, this ride makes you move your arms like you're slinging your own webs, and it will pick that up and shoot the webs onto the screen to attack those spider bots. Now, this is not my first attraction like this that I've experienced, as I was able to ride the Lego Ninjago experience down at Legoland, California back in 2019, and it is practically the same ride system, if not exactly the same ride system that was implemented at California Adventure, just with a little bit of change in the seating arrangement. This is a take that a lot of people are probably not going to agree with, but I think I preferred the Ninjago ride. Is it technically worse? Yes, but it feels a heck of a lot longer. You're also moving a lot more. You're not moving from one space and then sitting and then moving again and sitting. That was my biggest complaint. It felt like Midway Mania and Ninjago had a baby, and not in a good way. It also didn't help. We were stuck on certain scenes for quite a while longer that didn't accrue any points, so we were just flinging our arms for no real reason, and that gets really tiring after a while, especially if you're sitting in the same room for a couple of minutes. So by the time we left the ride, all I could think was, man, that was short, and boy do my arms hurt. Is the technology improved on Ninjago? I guess. Honestly, I couldn't really tell with my one ride on both of these. But Web Slingers was definitely making me feel like they should have stuck with a different ride idea for this building space, especially after being able to experience Spider-Man over at Universal in Florida first. Goodness, that is one of my favorite rides of all time. It is immaculate, even decades later. From this point, we decided to check out some of the calmer areas of the land, which include where Doctor Strange is out and about, or at least used to be. But unfortunately, just before I visited the park, there was a pretty big cut to entertainment in the land. So while we spent a lot of time in this area of the park just trying to experience as much as we could, I only saw a total of 4 characters: Spider-Man, Loki, Gamora, and Star-Lord. with the latter two being next to Guardians of the Galaxy doing their typical dancing show, which, to be completely honest, I don't know if they still do that. Let me know if they do in the comments. This part of the land really became my favorite, at least in the vibe, but I gotta say, it felt like a waste of space, especially since they cut the magic show just a couple of months before this, and so much of this area is taken up by 2020-esque photo opportunities. Like, I thought we moved on from these pop-up experiences that are only meant to take pictures with. Turning around to the rest of the land, this is where my faith in it took a dive. Looking at the main Avengers building, it is truly spectacular with the Quinjet up top and plenty of details around it. However, there is a ginormous concrete pad in front of it. Now, that would make more sense if this was a main thoroughway, but it's not. At least not until there's multiple attractions back in this space. And comparing it to some of those choke points from entering either side of the land, it felt very awkward. And here's another thing. It was the middle of August, so it was hot, and that concrete only made that problem worse. So we took a step into the store inside the Avengers building and got a look at a lot of the merchandise, which, to be honest, a lot of it's pretty cool. However, pretty dang overpriced if you ask me. And man, those DLC options for Web Slingers? Like, I know Web Slingers is just kind of a bad mobile game, but do we really have to do that too? From here, we walked around to where multiple meet and greets would have been taking place if they hadn't been cut just a couple of months prior, and then we got a quick look at Pym's test kitchen, which unfortunately we weren't able to experience that day because the line for the regular food stretched around the building, and the bar portion was overfilled and only taking mobile order at that point. This is when we got to look at Guardians of the Galaxy as part of this cohesive land. To be honest, even though it technically is more cohesive, it still feels pretty isolated in comparison to the rest. Maybe that's just some of my own views after knowing Guardians of the Galaxy for much longer now, but it still sticks out quite a bit, even with those newer walls that try and split it off from Hollywood. It still very much fits into the Hollywood area more so than Avengers Campus, even if the theme doesn't match. You can tell the sightline it was made for, and it definitely wasn't from Avengers Campus. From there, I didn't really want to go back into the land, as we only had the one day, and I wanted to be able to check out as much as I could after not being at the park in 3 years. Don't get me wrong, there were some nice surprises in there, and I genuinely think that front half of the land is really pretty. However, the actual contents within them are not so great. So while I think this land ended up better than I was expecting, I still can't help but feel pretty disappointed, especially with it being at a Disney park. They really got rid of 5 different kid-friendly attractions with plenty of shade and amazing theming all around, for one just okay family-friendly attraction, lots of space for entertainment before they cut it, and of course a complete lack of shade in the back half. I understand that multiple rides are going to be built in this area in the next couple of years, but I don't think they're going to fix the main issues I have. Will the land and the park be a lot better off with giant e-ticket attractions and other things alike? Absolutely. But will it fix the core issues? That's something I can only dream of. At least when this area had entertainment, it definitely felt like a place I wanted to go check out instead of just see for a little bit and then never come back. So, those are my first thoughts on Avengers Campus. Even though they're a year and a half late, I'm very curious to see what you guys think currently down in the comments below. I would love to know your thoughts on this area. I'm a big Marvel fan myself, and I can't help but feel like they could have done Marvel better, as well as just Disney parks better in general too. But please, let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. I would love to be able to read them. And if you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe. We've got more videos about Disney, Knott's Berry Farm, and other parks all around the US coming out soon. And heck, even some more Japan videos in the near future if you want to see what a truly phenomenal Disney park is looking like nowadays. But thank you all so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. And of course, until next time, we'll see you on the next ride.